Receiving incoming transmission.
Incoming transmission.
Incoming transmission.
I'm sure you have many questions.
Transmission.
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 Welcome everyone to Transmission, show number 1. My name is Ben Strahan. I work for OKGrow as a full-time Meteor developer, and I love it. And so I want Meteor to just like become the best thing in the world. And so that's why I am here to do this with one of the guys that I have tremendous respect for and is just like blowing it out of the park every day, Sashko. What's up, Sashko?
Hey, yeah, thanks for introducing me. My name is Sashko. I've been working at Meteor for about 2 years now on a bunch of different projects, all on the open source side. So the Windows port, some of the React integration stuff, most recently the Meteor guide, which is kind of our way to try to encode some of the best practices we think are for Meteor development. Yeah, and I'm really excited to be here. And I guess I just want to clarify that the stuff that we're talking about here is just, I guess, our own personal opinions. What I understand from being around the office at Meteor all the time and reading the forums, and what I think the future holds. Not necessarily something that's like a company-wide commitment. Like it's not like I talked to the CEO before coming here.
Yes. And that disclaimer also covers me. If I say something stupid, Paul, you can't fire me. That's basically what it is. But like what we're going to be covering each week is we are going to be picking the top topics that are coming from the Meteor forums. If you guys aren't familiar with the Meteor forums is, it's like an awesome, very dynamic environment where people are asking questions, asking and getting help, and also making announcements both on the user side and from MDG itself. You can go to it at forums.meteor.com. And we're going to pick the way that we're going to do this is we're going to try and cram in as many shows as we can, or as many topics. It's either going to be like 4 or 6, some even number. And half of the picks are going to be coming from Sashko and what he really finds interesting and what he wants to talk on from the MDG point of view. And the other half, I'm going to be opening up to the community and have you guys vote. And then I'll represent those. And I think it's going to like lead to some like amazing talks. But we'll see. This is the first show.
Yeah, we'll see that.
So let's dive into it. So the first one that we have is 2 forum topics. And you kind of merged them together. And they both were from Arunoda. They both were Medium posts from Arunoda. The first one was the top 5 predictions of Meteor in 2016. And then there was an introduction to Mantra.
Yep.
Yeah. And so like, let's dive into it, man. If I want to lead off on this really quick. So right away on the predictions of 2016, Arunoda said, and I want to quote him here, but that is history. Right now, Meteor is a mess. Frankly, this is really a bad time to start a new Meteor app. And,
yeah, it's right at the top there. Yeah.
And that's like, that's not my way of talking. And it's kind of interesting. You think it's like, I think it's like a little bit of a link bait to like get people hooked, because then the rest of the article is basically saying the exciting things that are coming to Meteor in 2016. And really quick, like since that's at the top of the article, I guess like we could tackle that first. Like I just like kind of said my stance on like those link baiting titles and subtitles just now. Like what are you thinking? Like MDG and you, when you guys read that kind of stuff, do you guys take it personal, or do you like kind of shove it off and like say, hey, this is just so like they can get people reading their article? Or
Yeah, I guess it's pretty interesting. Like I think when I read something like that, I try to analyze, what the motivation is of the person who's writing it. And I guess the motivation I can think of is that people are trying kind of to get a response or some sort of either a certain outcome or get people interested. It's kind of like a hook, like one way is say like link bait or something. But I feel like part of it is people want us to understand here at MDG, like that for some people the situation is quite serious, and they have certain needs or desires for what they want Meteor to do that aren't quite being fulfilled right now. I think the thing that's unfortunate is that there are also a lot of people for whom Meteor does fulfill their needs right now, and they're quite happy building their applications and using the stuff that we have out. And so I guess like when I read that somebody's unhappy with the current state of Meteor, I wish sometimes they came with a little disclaimer that it's like, for my use case. And I think like, part of what makes that a little bit more weighted in the negative direction is people who are happy with that stuff don't have as much of a reason to post articles about it, right? You don't often see an article saying, wow, like how great is this thing that I'm successfully using? Because a lot of those people are, they're just working on their jobs and building their apps, right? They're not necessarily interested in, extolling the virtues that they believe everyone knows. And I think the place where that becomes even more complicated is when these articles are shared with the wider community outside of Meteor.
Yeah.
And I guess like that's one of the other topics kind of is some of the posts by Sasha about like, some recent history about Meteor. And I think, when somebody who's a Meteor developer reads these things, they think, yeah, I started using Meteor because there's certain things about it that I really like, and that hooked me. And when I read this negative post, I put that in the context of my understanding of what I already know about Meteor. But for somebody who might not even be aware of the positives or the things that you might get as a benefit, then it ends up as like a strictly negative sentiment, and that's but
yeah.
I think all we can do is increase the amount of positive content, and then it'll be more balanced.
Yeah. I think it's working to get people fired up and get people excited. It's working to get people to read the article. We can understand the point of view where like some people have frustrations, but I think you hit it right on the head where if it's coming from a leader or a thought leader in the area, that's also kind of people are going to gravitate to that and just like accept that as fact and not fully understanding where they're coming from. Whereas like we might understand where they're coming from, but someone else brand new, they're gonna like be like, oh, that's what it is then. If they said it, obviously that's true. And that kind of sets a tone. And that also, I think, encourages people or emboldens people to then think to themselves, oh, it's okay to talk like that.
Yeah, I think obviously it's freedom of speech or whatever. Like you can talk about whatever you want. I just feel like for people who have invested in Meteor's success, like I believe Arunoda is, I think it's to his own benefit to have a relatively positive outlook. Because I think his message is kind of like, at the end of the day, his message is certain things in Meteor might be a mess right now, and you should come to the Kadira team and our framework and mantra to help improve that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are ways of saying that are more positive, although like looking at the actual predictions in that article, they're very, I think a lot of them are pretty good.
I think so too. Like
I have some,
totally different tone.
Yeah.
Before we move on though from this one, do you want to dispel that sentence, that last sentence where it's like, frankly, it's a really bad time to start a new Meteor app? Because I don't agree with that. Like every day we have new clients come on, and without hesitation, we're firing up new Meteor apps.
Yeah.
Now with the premise, with the understanding that 1.3 is coming out, if someone did have the option to wait like a month, like should they? Like what is your take on that?
So I think, let me see. I think part of it is, people feel like they always want to be on the newest thing, but like it almost sounds like if you read some articles that Meteor is somehow worse right now than it was a year ago when people were very, very excited about building their apps with it. And I mean, it's definitely not. It's strictly better today than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
You can, if you could build cool stuff with it a year ago, you can build the exact same cool stuff, basically with the exact same code that you could do a year ago, because we haven't actually broken anything. Like everything still works just well. And, that's kind of the direction we also took with the Meteor guide is I think certain people are trying to think kind of far into the future, like what is like the abstract best architecture. I think I see our role as more of like coming in and filling in the things that other people have already agreed on, so that if you look at something like the Meteor guide or features in core Meteor, you can be sure that you're using something that a lot of people across lots of communities have agreed is a good idea. And so, naturally we're going to be, we're not even that far behind. Like, if you're looking at all these container patterns in Redux or whatever, that came out in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
I think I would gladly make the trade-off to be several months behind the cutting edge if I can just focus on doing my job and not like refreshing Hacker News every 5 minutes to figure out what the newest Flux implementation is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the right mentality that people should be thinking when they're discussing new features, and rather than cracking the whip and being like, hey, why don't we have this in Meteor right now? Like there really is cutting edge.
Yeah.
But so like with now there will be like breaking changes in 1.3 though.
Will there? Like what?
I don't know. That's what I'm asking. Will there be like with module system?
I think there won't actually.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So
and any breaking changes that we make in the Meteor 1.x series are either an accident. I mean, that's always possible because you never know what dusty corner of your framework somebody might be relying on, and some of them are quite dusty and hard to find.
Yeah.
Or it's like a very carefully considered trade-off, like it was literally impossible. I think, like, what's one case? I can't even think of that many cases. Like, mostly we put in a lot of effort to make sure that you can just run your app and have it work.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume 1.3 will be no different. As far as I can tell, you can take any 1.2 app and you can just run it, and you don't even have to use modules.
Nice. So that's like the perfect answer. So guys, like that totally dispels kind of like what's going on. If you have an idea and you want to start an app, like start it today with Meteor. Like,
yeah, and the best part is, when 1.3 does come out, we'll just give you some directions if you're so inclined to make your app even better. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're gonna look at what people are doing in 1.2, and we're gonna say, what's the simplest way to transition that to 1.3. For example, like there's the whole like all package application structure, which is great for like testing and modularity, but kind of requires you to write some configuration. Mm-hmm. And I think moving from like the package style in 1.2 to the module style in 1.3, while not necessary, actually will just be like really fun. You look at all this configuration you have and you're like, oh, great, I'm just gonna get rid of that. And my app is just gonna be better. And it works the same way it did before.
Nice. That's awesome. That is so cool. So now let's dive into it. Like, I love talking to you, man. So
yeah, no problem.
We got like 2 sentences in now. All right. Article.
The most fine-grained analysis of every blog post in the Meteor community.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like, so he broke it up into like sections, and like let's like touch on each section pretty quick because it like kind of goes into like a bigger thing. So right off the top, he says Meteor will become much closer to the JavaScript ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's like alluding to NPM.
Yeah.
And bringing that all in. It was interesting. Gosh, I don't even know in what forum post, but Jeff replied to one deep down somewhere saying that long-term looks like Atmosphere is going to be slowing down, but it's a very thoughtful process. And we're going to be moving everything to NPM in an ideal world. Gosh, I wish I had a reference for that. But did you see that comment from Jeff? I think
no, I don't recall that particular one.
Okay. So it got me thinking though, like what do you predict or what do you see in the next 12 months? Like what's Atmosphere going to look like in the next 12 months?
Yeah, so I guess first let's just, I just want to reply directly to the whole like closer to the JS ecosystem NPM thing.
Yeah.
I guess it kind of ties in. So I think like the reality is NPM is the place where you find a lot of popular JavaScript packages directly from the author, right? So while there are a lot of great packages on Atmosphere that are Meteor specific, something like Simple Schema or Astronomy or one of those things. If you want to get something like Moment.js or even jQuery now, or basically some small utility to convert some string to some other string, I think the easiest place to find that is on NPM today. And I think it's unfortunate that we've ended up in a situation where some of those packages are now kind of duplicated onto Atmosphere, right? Where people have set up some scripts where when something is updated on NPM, they republish an Atmosphere package with that code, and it just makes it harder to find the right documentation or the right version. So I think being able to use packages from the wider JavaScript ecosystem from NPM directly is going to be amazing just for the maintainability of your app and being able to go straight to the source for your stuff. In terms of where that puts Atmosphere, in the next 12 months, I would guess Atmosphere would serve two main purposes. So one, immediately is that it's definitely the best place for packages that integrate tightly with Meteor. So if you have something that integrates with Meteor's build system, for example, it's a compiler for a certain type of code like Less or Sass, or if it integrates deeply with the data system, or if it's a full stack package that brings in an accounts thing and like a client-side login window and something like that. Those are things that currently you basically can't actually ship on NPM at all. So Atmosphere is absolutely necessary for those things. Especially on Atmosphere, one thing you can do that you can't do anywhere else in the world is publish a package that has a server-side component, a client-side component, and a Cordova plugin included. So if you want to have a single piece of functionality that's encapsulated across all the different platforms, that's the only place to put it. And there's definitely pros and cons to having packages that are coupled in that way, but I can think of a lot of use cases where you would want something like that. I think longer term, it would be great to also bring in a situation that people have been talking about a little bit where you can be able to find relevant NPM packages in Atmosphere as well. And this is kind of wading into more like, futuristic territory where, we're not really working on this like at the moment, but it would be great if you could find, some kind of UI component or like a package which is useful specifically in Meteor more than other places, or maybe, as a package author, you wanted to publish it on NPM to get access to the wider JavaScript ecosystem and people using it. We have some special built-in features specifically for Meteor. I think it would be great to list those packages as well on Atmosphere. Because yeah, like as a package author, if your package is not deeply integrated into Meteor, I think it makes sense to try to get the widest number of users possible so you can get more people contributing to your package, more people using it and finding bugs. And I think the way to do that, if it's not tightly integrated to Meteor, is to publish it on NPM. I can't hear you. I think your microphone.
Oh. Am I there?
Yeah.
I'm back. Okay. Crazy microphone. So I have one question to another one off this topic, and then we'll move on to the next one. With integration with NPM, are we going to find like any of the core packages that makes up Meteor breaking out into their own NPM packages going forward, possibly?
So I think that wouldn't be in Meteor 1.3.
No.
But like I said, it makes sense to publish things that are just a set of JavaScript code that anyone should be able to use. An easy example is check, for example, right? We have this package check that just lets you check some types, that you're passing into some stuff.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Nothing really to do with Meteor at all, except for, using Meteor. I think that, in the future, maybe like Meteor 1.4 or something, it would make sense to make some of those core, like very reusable, very modular parts of Meteor, make them available to the JavaScript ecosystem so that they can start to be compared and evaluated in that context. Mm-hmm. Because, personally, I think something like check is really awesome and something that doesn't have an equivalent standard as far as I know in some of the wider JavaScript community. And it would be great so that people who are looking for that kind of thing can evaluate some parts of Meteor as one of their options.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the big thing. Like breaking it up and like having it as separate packages on NPM. Like I just see that only as a positive thing to like have people build on top of that, exciting things, get a little taste of what's coming out of MDG, and it's just like, grows adoption.
Yeah, and I think one really important thing to consider is that I think a lot of people look at that and they think, oh, that means that I'm going to have all the same problems that people who are using NPM today have. But I think it's not hard at all to have a package that's published to NPM, but then have the user experience of using Meteor be just as easy as it is right now.
Yeah. Especially coming from you guys. You guys have super high quality. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's our main goal, I think.
Well, I definitely think that you guys have accomplished that. And I think it's so good that that's why there's such a demand for like you guys to be pushing out more stuff, is because it's like so high.
Yeah, but it's hard to build that stuff too, right? I mean, I think that's why there's sometimes a perception of like that we move a little bit slower. I think like, for example, like Arunoda pushes out stuff like all the time. And I think like, that's awesome. And that's a great way to try out new technology. And then I hope that we can take some of the stuff that he's working on and bring it into core and make it like the thing that works for everyone in the way that like you expect it to work in Meteor. Yeah,
totally. We have a joke that like Arunoda is like a group of 2,000 robots. And so like really when we refer to him, we refer to him by serial number. So like that's like 192.
Which Arunoda wrote this blog post.
Yes, exactly.
He couldn't have possibly written them all.
Yes. How did these blog posts get published at the exact same time, Arunoda? How did that happen?
Yeah, like one day he'll be on 2 podcasts at once and you'll be like, I figured it out.
Yes, there we go. It's perfect. Is there anything else that you want to add to this topic before we jump on to the next one that he had?
No, go ahead.
Cool. So this is like pretty innovative. I'm really looking forward to your input on this. But the next one is, Arunoda says, there will be a few stacks built on top of Meteor.
That's right.
And then he alluded to Mantra. And we could either like dive into Mantra now, or we could like, wet the whistle some people here and like say, hey, we're going to move that to the end and hit these other titles.
I think it could be good to roll through. I mean, there's stuff that is non-Mantra related here, which is that Mantra is not at all the first stack built on top of Meteor that's not Meteor.
Exactly.
There's this like the reactive stack thing. There's some of those things that integrate Webpack. I think that's actually one of them. There's clinical Meteor. So Mantra is a great example of a stack built on top of Meteor with some more specific recommendations, but it's not the first one.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's move on then. So the next one is RIP to Tracker.
Mm-hmm.
And this was interesting because Facey Spacey also published a really large article on Medium about Tracker 2.0. And right on the top, like his premise was, hey, I don't think Tracker needs to go anywhere with like all this like new modern stack stuff that everyone's talking about. But instead, like here's a very long proposal for Tracker 2.0.
Yes, that's right.
So it's interesting. So like, what do you see the future of Tracker is?
So I think that Tracker is one of those things that, personally, if it was up to me, I would have figured out a way to make Tracker easily usable outside of Meteor as soon as possible. We could have easily done that like 2 years ago. I think that, and actually this is a very relevant post to myself because, I've mentioned a couple times in the forums, I'm on the, finishing up the guide project. I'm moving to a new team at Meteor. We're calling the data team. And Tracker is under the purview of that team. So I might be, able to do some stuff about this in the near future. But basically, I think that Tracker and Blaze, which I think are like pretty related because kind of the only way to get data into Blaze is through Tracker.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's very important that we let these technologies get a life in the wider community. Because, if Tracker is a good thing, then logically people outside of Meteor should want to use it. And if there's exactly 0 people outside of Meteor that want to use Tracker, then it's not a good thing, I think. That'd be my perception. So I think we should avoid trying to, you shouldn't be using Tracker just because you're using Meteor and you have no choice. You should be using it because it's actually a good thing to be building your app on top of. And I think the only way to figure that out is to put it head-to-head against some of the other ways that people are doing client-side data management in JavaScript, and then I think the best one, or the one that is, the most maintainable, the easiest to use, and compromise of all those things, should be the one that comes out on top and should be the one that's recommended in Meteor in the future.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, so I think it's hard to exactly say from here, from where I'm standing, how long Tracker's life is going to be. I mean, I can guarantee for sure it's going to be around for at least a year or 2 years.
Yeah,
it's great. It works really well right now for a huge variety of applications. But I think it's best for everyone if when the whole client-side JavaScript dust settles, that there's something that a lot of people can agree on is the best approach, and perhaps that will be a future version of Tracker.
What an amazing response. So that was super humbling, because Tracker is near and dear, and it's such a core part of Meteor, but yet you're willing to say on your own opinion, hey, we're going to pick what's best, coming from the wider audience of JavaScript. So heck yeah, hats off to you, man. When you were talking, it reminds me of Slava when he was at JSConf in Japan, was it, or Singapore or something like that. And his talk was all about Tracker. And right at the beginning of it, he's like, hey, this is in Meteor right now, but it doesn't have to be. So I'm going to give my whole talk about not using, using Tracker on its own.
Yep.
And that was a pretty amazing talk.
Yeah, and I think there's a whole universe of things that could be built on top of Tracker. The way that I'm sure there are a lot of things built on top of Redux, although I haven't had as much time to look into that in depth yet. But all kinds of reactive data structures, accessors, APIs, templating engines like Blaze. There was for example, a proposal to figure out how to get reactive data into React. There's been 4 different proposals at this point, and nobody's quite agreed on one, right? So that's why we have this whole data container business right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe if Tracker was a thing that was more widely accepted, it would be the thing that people use to load data into React. And I mean, I think there's still time. People are coming up with new things like this every day now. So. Oh
my gosh. Yeah, it's brutal. And then we're going to be hearing stuff coming out of the React Conf about Relay and all that stuff. And everyone's saying, oh, Relay's going to eat Flux and Redux's lunch and just manage all the different states and everything. So it'll be interesting. I think it was Arunoda or one other person who says you can manage reactive data sources with RxJS, and then you don't need Tracker. And then I was thinking to myself, well, wouldn't Tracker be lighter than that? Why?
Yeah, I mean, you can say that out. Yeah, you can say the same thing in the other direction. If you're using RxJS to manage your data, you could be using Tracker to manage it instead.
Yeah.
So many options. They all do roughly the same thing.
Yeah. I'm just worried that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, where everyone's saying ooh, all these shiny, there's a shiny new stack, a shiny new stuff. And it's let's just replace it for the heck of it, all our old stuff that we have and everything.
No. And I think the most important thing is to sorry, I kind of interrupted you in the middle of something.
That's all right. I was just saying that your approach was is very right on. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to open it up to NPM, and this is all speculation because that data team isn't formed yet, right? But you basically said the right thing to do that from your point of view is throw it on NPM and then see who wins, start doing the battle and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing is to not pick winners before there is a winner, right? If having a conversation a year ago, it would be oh my God, throw everything out, use Flux, have actions and dispatchers, right? And today, nobody has actions and dispatchers except for the people who wrote their app exactly 1 year ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you said that Meteor is considered cutting edge, but is it cutting edge? We're months behind on things of implementing things that have come out, but that's almost by design, because there's so much dust that's kicked up. There's so many things that when some new idea is being introduced right now, it's going to change radically in 6 months. So you do have to slow it down a little bit, and make the right decision.
Yeah, but I think actually you can have your cake and eat it too with this problem. So the biggest thing I've been thinking of is, and this is why I was working on the Meteor guide, is I think it's just good engineering to make a system which is modular and has great APIs between all the different parts, so that you can replace them when you want to, right? Right now, the only reason that there's not a super crisp API between like Minimongo and DDP, so you can use something instead of Minimongo, is just because we didn't have time to build that, because we wanted to get Meteor out the door as fast as possible. But hopefully in the nearer future, we can make it so that the APIs between those things are crisp. And so if you were saying, okay, I read the Meteor guide, it totally used Minimongo, I don't want to use it for whatever reason, and I want to replace that with Redux, that should be easy to do. It should be up to you. But there shouldn't be any pressure to go and like the first thing you have to do when you build your app is like figure out which thing you're going to use. There should be a default, which is well supported, and there should be an easy opportunity to replace things so you don't feel like you're locked in.
Interesting. So, and that kind of goes, I'm going to skip the next topic. We'll come back to it because it naturally goes into the last one, which Arunoda says Meteor is going to become more of like an infrastructure, and not so much like a framework. And so like you kind of just like pegged it there, like people like they go to frameworks for like a very opinionated way to develop, and you guys are like you have Meteor guides. So this is why it's so interesting. So like Meteor guides is kind of like an opinionated way of doing things. Then we're going to have like these mini stacks on top of Meteor that's going to be opinionated even more. And at the core, Meteor itself is like very little opinionation, and you can like break out things as much as you want and all that stuff. So it's really interesting. And I think Arunoda, I'd like to hear your input on it, but like having Meteor be like an infrastructure is like a light bulb, like, oh, for the longest time, you would think of Node and right away you'd think of Express. Will it be like you think of Node and it's just like, oh, it's Meteor, and then you build your thing?
Well, this is an interesting thing. There's been a couple of posts on the forum where people are like, what will happen if like there's all these different things and you can use all these different parts with Meteor and like it's so flexible, like how will you be able to tell the difference between an NPM based app and a Meteor app? And I think there doesn't have to be any reason you can tell the difference.
Well, and people are freaking out over this.
Right. So here's my yeah.
Sorry.
So I think that I think actually it's very important to have both. So going into this whole like JavaScript fatigue business, there is a real problem right now that like JavaScript doesn't have a standard library. It doesn't have like a certain way to do this or that. And so I do think that the promise of Meteor, in my opinion, the reason that I think this is a really promising project, is to deliver all that standard stuff. So I think that at the end of the day, a Meteor app will be an app built with some JavaScript packages that may be on NPM, they may be on Atmosphere. It's going to be an app that uses some build tool that supports ECMAScript modules, which we hope that the easiest way to do that will be to use the Meteor build tool. It'll be an app that has an interactive experience and basically like the whole connected client thing we keep talking about, where there's a lot of logic happening on your client and it needs to keep track of what's going on the server. And then hopefully we think that these kinds of apps will be best hosted on Galaxy, right? And so there's all these different components you need to build these kind of like interactive applications. And so I think like any application that is interactive in that way will hopefully be in one way or another a Meteor app. Maybe we'll use Meteor's data solution, maybe we'll use Meteor's build tool, maybe we'll run on Galaxy. But I think that the best way to make all these components the best they can be is to make them be part of, in theory, basically any app.
Nice. Some people feel like Meteor is going to lose its competitive edge and like give up so much of what makes it great and simple if it opens up to the outside world. And your argument, which I think is accurate, is that it's just going to make it all the stronger. It's going to come together and make like a great environment. to develop.
Yeah, and I think like, a big thing I've been pushing for internally is, and externally, I don't know if it's clear, but I think a lot of what people confuse, like people will often ask questions like, when is X going to be in Meteor Core? When is Y going to be in Meteor Core? Which release of Meteor is going to have this thing or that thing? And, at the end of the day, like, I don't think it's up to Meteor releases to build things into core. And that's what the Meteor guide is all about. Because at the end of the day, all this is just a way to shuffle some JavaScript code around and like push it somewhere and like run it somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you could start from scratch and have no Meteor, and you could build basically what I imagine to be a Meteor app if you just follow all the principles that we wrote down in the guide. And so I guess like in my mind, we're not losing any of the opinionatedness of Meteor by making the core more modular if we bring in the appropriate components from places that aren't developed by us, right? So for example, like Flow Router is a great example where if you go and read the Meteor guide right now, it tells you to use Flow Router. To me, that means there's a router in core because it works with every different part of Meteor. We tell you how to do it. We will have example apps on it in Meteor 1.3. We're going to update all the example apps to use the guide, all that stuff. If you had a Meteor training course, that's what you would teach. If you were hired to do a job for a Meteor company, hopefully that's what they would be using.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the part that actually matters. It doesn't matter who wrote the actual code in the first place. And like, that's great that Arunoda wrote it, and he can get the, the marketing benefit from having that package.
Yeah.
But everyone gets the benefit of being able to use it in their application and like have a great router.
Yeah. So, so there's one group of people that like just want all the latest stuff, and you guys are moving towards that because everything's going to be modular now. You're opening up to the more JavaScript world. So like you're going that direction. And then there's the other group of people who are like, Meteor's not going to be unique anymore. Someone else is going to come along, and they're opening it up to like everyone and everything to like plug into it in the Node community. So it's like, what's their competitive edge, their uniqueness? And I think people are worried about that. And so like, what would you like say to those people to like kind of calm their emotions for like good?
So I guess the question is, what's the motivation here, all right? This question presupposes the existence of a unit of stuff called Meteor, which we all want to be successful in an abstract sense, right? So I would go back to the start. The start is you probably want to build some kind of application, right? You want to build the best application that you can in the least amount of time, spending the least amount of money. And I think you should use whatever meets your goals to do that. So I think one of the options for building that application you want to build is going to be some amalgamation of code, recommendations, and support provided by Meteor, the company. It's basically the goal here is to provide a totally, streamlined experience from having an idea for your application to running it in the cloud and having people use it. And that's the competitive edge. That's the only edge. The edge is what will be the thing that helps you get where you're trying to do as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to provide the overarching strategy for how you do that, and I think that is going to be us.
Cool.
So components are not built by us personally. That's the goal. The goal is not to have a specific view layer. The goal is to provide, a standard framework that's going to be stable that you can rely on for a long time to build the best app you can build.
So like provide a happy path for developers.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. The way I kind of snarkily think about it sometimes is like, you shouldn't have to be creative about your engineering process. You should be creative about your actual business and your features.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be there thinking about like, how am I going to manage my state? You should be thinking about like, what does my app look like and how are people going to use it?
Yes, exactly. And the yak shaver inside of me wants to like try the latest stuff, and I love it. And you said you can have your cake and eat it too. And I really believe that where Meteor is heading now, because I want to be productive. but I also want to shave like 1 or 2 yaks in a project and like try something new. And it was up to now, it might have been like too difficult or too much of a project to try to integrate something and hack around a Meteor to get that executed. I see it becoming a lot more easier moving forward. And I really appreciate that. That's something like, I'm of the firm opinion that like, that's not going to make that's not a bad business decision on your side of things. At least I don't think so.
And it's not, I mean, the people here, like, you know, as a developer at Meteor, I'm not working here because I'm like trying to make good business decisions, right? I'm working here because like, you know, I'm passionate about, you know, making web development suck less, basically.
Yeah, seriously. That's amazing. So we talked a lot about Meteor Guide, and how's that going? Like Meteor Guide, like I've heard amazing feedback from it, but I haven't dived into it myself. It's like I'm admitting a sin right now.
I think that's a pretty common situation, and we're thinking of some ways to better promote some of the content in there. So, I mean, my goal was I basically pushed really hard for the guide project to happen because I sympathize with all these concerns of like, you know, if things are getting more flexible, how do you know what you're actually supposed to use? Even back in the day when the only problem you had in life was whether you should use Iron Router or Flow Router, it's already too much, right? You should just have one.
Yeah.
And so that's where that started from, is any question that somebody asks me about the architecture of their app, I should be able to link them to a section in the guide that already answers that question. Mm-hmm. And that has actually been frighteningly correct, which is great. There are a couple of articles we don't quite have, and that's okay because we're going to write them for 1.3. Mm-hmm. Specifically, the ones we're still working on are testing and application structure.
Yep.
So those are going to be absolutely huge things that people have been missing, I think, in Meteor for a while. But you know, everything like how do you do SEO? How do you do client-side state management? It's in there. There's at least 3 sections about client-side state management that say actually like very similar things to what Mantra says about it. The problem is that we're not as good. You know, we like sitting back and building stuff, and we're not as good at hyping it up too much, I think. So for example, one thing we can do is produce like 72 blog posts where each title of the blog post is like SEO and Meteor, and then it's just like a link to the guide, and it's like, cool.
Well, you got to be like the only SEO way, and it blows away WordPress, it blows away like you got to like have like a negative hook in there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I hope that actually like what we can do is produce those articles in a way that appeals to the entire JavaScript community. Mm-hmm. Right? And say, look, we wrote the Meteor guide. Yeah, it's for Meteor, but like, you know, if you ever wondered how to do data loading in your app, here's the guide article how to do that, and you can actually use that in your app today. Even if you're not using the Meteor build tool, even if you're not using Meteor Cordova, even if you're not using Galaxy, this is the right way to do data, and we wrote it for you, and like maybe you'll like that and you'll use the other parts.
And that's killer. I keep on telling people, well, when I feel like they lost context of what you guys are trying to achieve, I say to them, like, there is no one doing as ambitious of a project or trying to accomplish as ambitious of a whole overarching project as Meteor in the JavaScript world.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and so it's like they are producing like high quality stuff, but this is like brand new. Like you guys are like inventing so much stuff. There's not a business model so per se on like Meteor as a whole on what you guys are trying to accomplish. So you guys got to invent it along the way, and that's something that I really want like people to kind of grasp and understand. And it's amazing. And you guys are giving it to us for free. It's like, what?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess we're kind of hoping that like people will see Galaxy and they'll be like, oh, you know, like you guys gave me all this stuff for free. I should really look into this thing because I feel like contributing to this.
Absolutely.
That's one way of looking at it. Obviously, we think Galaxy is like by far the best way to host these kinds of apps. Mm-hmm. If you didn't agree with that, like you could even just think of it as like a donation to this thing that you. But I mean, obviously, that's not a good business model, so we're going to make it the best.
I have a dev account with Galaxy, and you know what I loved? I loved pushing all my environment variables through settings, and I was like, oh, this is like what? This is like stupid easy. And just like using the command line still and deploying, I'm like, oh, it shouldn't be this easy. but,
Yeah.
but it is.
Yeah,
And,
I know like these days whenever I'm like building any app, I'm like, okay, if I build this not with Meteor, I'm gonna have to figure out how to deploy it later. So it's like not even worth it. Like I'm just like, oh yeah, my like crappy landing page, like I guess I'm gonna build that with Meteor because then I can just push it to Galaxy or Meteor deployer.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So we talked a little bit about Meteor guides, and I wanted to like jump into Mantra then right now because if that's cool with you.
Sure.
Okay. So should I lead off with this question? Asking myself. Yes, I should. Okay. So you got Meteor guides, and we have Mantra, and you were correct in what you're saying. Like Mantra is not the first one, and when Arunoda was saying, "Hey, there's going to be more of these like stacks built on top of Meteor," you like shook your head, yes, everything. So my question is, like, where does that put Meteor guides? Like, you guys endorsed a router. Is Meteor guides like going to endorse like a standard one of these stacks eventually? Like, this is purely hypothetical because like nothing's really concrete right now in this world.
So I think one way you can think of the Meteor guide is as a way of writing down. So the way we actually started writing it is I sat down and I thought about applications and I thought about everything I've heard from everyone who's building anything basically. I wrote down a giant list of every single problem that application developers face today, right? Like for every category, I was like, okay, routing, okay, mobile, deployment, security, whatever, all these bullet points. And you can see that original list if you go to the guide repository. There was a giant file with like 120 or 200 bullet points in it.
Yes, yeah.
And so that's where that started. Is it didn't start with like, oh, we have to solve client-side data management. We have to solve like X and Y technical problem. I tried my best to put it in terms of what a developer is trying to accomplish. So it's not about a mindset and it's not about like abstractions or engineering or like using a certain technology. It's about the set of problems that you want to solve and how we think it's best to solve them. So that's the way I want to.
So the core underline is like the best way that you guys think it is to solve it.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there's, for example, a UI, like a UI article, right? So if you look at the UI article, and this article is totally view layer agnostic, right? It's like UI components. Okay, there's like 3 different kinds of UI components. There's the ones that load data, the ones that have state, the ones that don't have state, right? There's like internationalization, like here's how you want to do internationalization. There's like event throttling in your UI, right? There's like optimistic UI. There's how do you handle pagination? How do you indicate when a write is in progress? How do you do animations? When do you do animations? Why do you do animations? That just came with being like, okay, somebody's writing a UI. Like, what is all the stuff they're gonna have to think about?
Right.
And it doesn't start with like, you know, oh, we should have a single state atom because like that is the good thing to do. Like, it's just like a pragmatic answer to each of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where exactly that puts us in terms of like what stack we're going to recommend, but I think we're trying very hard to not be idealistic about it.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say at the end of the day is we want to just take the thing that you want to do and we want to tell you the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That means not even using part of Meteor, and that's fine. Like, if there's one of these things that requires you to go outside the Meteor ecosystem and load a package from NPM that we didn't write, and that package is better than what we built, then like that's what we're going to write about.
Because I like right now there's a question, like right now the guides is built with Blaze in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got one path and you got it with Blaze. So the question is like, do you stay on that one path promoting one thing, or do you make like a branch of it that's for React?
Yeah, I think that's a really great and kind of like a very I don't want to say obvious, but like it's like the question that you think of when you look at this thing.
Yeah.
And it's a great question. So here's how I look at it: is the view layer is a place where people are particularly opinionated. I think people are very much they're on the React team, or they're on the Angular team, or they're on the Blaze team. I think no amount of guide writing that we do is going to cause people to write their HTML in a different way.
Yeah, it's like Ford and Chevy.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
My dad was a mechanic. If I ever buy a Chevy, I'm going to get kicked out of the family.
So, yeah, so the way I'm looking at it is we right now have an article titled Blaze, and we tried as hard as possible to keep all the things that are purely Blaze specific in that article. I think we could do a better job. So one thing in particular that I thought of recently that I think might be a really cool idea is, this is also coming back to Mantra, for example, is there's this really cool idea of data containers that people are using to load data, specifically right now in their React applications, right? Because the idea is you want to have a component that is testable and usable anywhere, and then you want to have some logic about how to make that component work in your specific application, which includes like routing and data loading and actions and all that. So what if you could have one data container that worked with Meteor, and then you had Angular, Blaze, and React, and you could just use the same container to load data into Angular or Blaze or React? That would make all these chapters literally identical, right? You would have chapter about data loading. It would say, here's how you make a container for data loading, and then you pass in your Blaze, Angular, React component into it at the end. Then you go to the Blaze chapter, or the Angular chapter, or the React chapter. And that's what I'm thinking about when I'm saying, like, you could be writing a Meteor app that uses a trendy technology for the view rendering versus writing a React app that has like one hook in it to like get data from UDP. I think that's the way that I would do it, because I know that these view rendering technologies are going to keep changing. React is going to keep changing its API all the time.
Yes.
And you want to insulate as much of your app as possible from worrying about that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
2016, man, it's going to be crazy.
I'm stoked. I'm just like, my head's spinning.
Yeah, like I see no reason why we shouldn't just use the data container approach for Blaze. Like,
Yes.
Yeah. I am just, I've been seeing all these changes come in and how you guys have been reacting. And sometimes I'm just dumbfounded why people are not getting more excited. And I think you just summed it up, and like totally like a great like 30-second ad on like why people should get hyped up on it. Like look at, like, take that idea and how much fun would it be to just like play around with things now, and you have this constant that you can always depend on in Meteor, with your data, and you could just like plug in anything that you want and just go to town.
Yeah, and I think it's all about like isolating the different parts, right? Like if there could be a totally different situation where you love your React UI, but instead of loading your data in one way, you want to load it using Redux or whatever, and then you just switch up that partner, and that's great too. Yeah.
It goes back to the question though, like we have like these components that or these packages that run both on the server and the client. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like we want to like break them up so they can run in both areas.
Yep.
Because like what you're talking about is different view layers. And when we talk about the greatness of some of the Atmosphere packages, we know that they're great, but they're like locked into Blaze.
Right.
And so if we're talking about an agnostic front end where you can like plug in anything, well, then these packages are going to need to morph into that as well. So that kind of goes back to like the future of Atmosphere then, if we're going to like break everything up. And it seems like it would make sense to break things up so that you get the versatility that you need for the UI and everything that's going to be changing in the future.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think that like, in my mind, it's kind of an axiom that people will want to decide which view layer they use for their app, right? Some people want to use Vue.js, some people want to use like, what's it called? Like Riot? Yeah, some people want to use Riot, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to figure out how to make it work. We have to figure out how you can have a nice accounts package or a grid element package or an admin interface package or whatever that works everywhere. Mm-hmm. I think that there's, and I think the view layer is the only place we're going to have this problem, because I think that you can more cleanly isolate other parts like data and like routing and stuff like that. It's a lot easier, I think, in those places to build a glue layer that can be more consistent.
Yeah, like GraphQL helps us with the database thing, right?
Yeah, that's one way to do it, right? Like, You probably don't want to be writing your components against MongoDB queries if somebody's using a database that's not MongoDB.
Right.
And GraphQL is one example of a language that abstracts on top of that. Methods already have this property, right? If you just say, my package calls this set of methods, and then you just have to write a different implementation for that method for like SQL or Mongo, then it's like pretty okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I'm not exactly sure what the answer to this is going to be. I've actually heard from a lot of designers and like people who build UI components that they actually don't trust UI component libraries, but that's a whole other question. I know a lot of people who actually go out of their way not to use any packages that have UI in them. But anyway, aside from that, I think you're probably just going to have a way to maybe incrementally load those libraries. So if you want to have a page on your app that's completely controlled by like some admin package, and the admin package is written in React, I think we just need a way to let you load React only for that page, so it doesn't affect the rest of your application. And you can make the trade-off, whether it's worth it for you for that page or not.
So, and this was the big thing that I was like looking for. Gosh, I'm like, you brought up something. I have to go segue on this a little bit. But so one of the things that I really like about Webpack is that you could define entry points, and you just touched on that, saying like maybe in the future, like so we can have all these different view layers depending on the package that you've brought in.
That's right.
And so like that alludes to then entry points and stuff like that on what you're loading and everything.
Yeah. So I think having a module system is like absolutely imperative for this, because the problem with Meteor without modules is how would you even figure out which parts of your app to load? There's no like identifier. There's no like anything.
Yeah.
In Meteor, you either load the whole app or you don't load anything, because who knows what the dependencies are. But as soon as you have entry points, you can have an entry point for testing. You can have an entry point for client. You can have an entry point for the server. Our module system already only loads the actual modules that you require, right? So, you can have as many NPM packages as you want in your app, but if you don't, import them from your client-side code, they're not going to get loaded on the client, right? And so from that, there was just a tiny step, in my opinion, to just having another entry point that also uses the exact same mechanism to load only things that it uses, and then you just load that separately. I don't want to speak for the platform or build tool team right now, but I imagine that's one of the things they're very excited about the new module support.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like that's nothing that's going to be in 1.3.
No, unfortunately not. Yeah, so 1.3 is, I think the goal is to get something out as soon as possible that will allow people to get started using this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So like trying to split it up into multiple releases, so that you don't have to wait like 4 more months for us to implement like code splitting or something.
Yeah. What is the rough target for 1.3 to drop?
Well, we already like kind of leaked it or something. So we have these Meteor Guide stand-up meetings every week, and we actually put the notes up publicly in the Meteor Guide repo. So one of those notes mentioned that we expect Meteor 1.3 to land like sometime in late February. So that's when we're targeting writing the new guide articles for that stuff. So.
Wow, that's fast. That's cool.
Yeah. So Meteor 1.3, you'll have that article that tells you how to test every part of your app. You want to test a method, you want to test a collection, like here you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we saw that that issue that Benjamin opened up. I think Avatal is on testing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, and that's a great collaboration between so this is this new thing we want to try out called like guide-driven development, basically is what we're calling it. It calls out to this other thing that Amazon was doing, which is like release, was it blog post driven development? Basically, it's like you write the release post first, and then you like write the actual feature. So we're thinking a thing where, again, in the philosophy of the guide, you write down all the problems you want to solve, then you write down how you think they should be solved, and then you build the feature, versus trying to build the feature and seeing if it solves the problems later. So that's what we're doing with testing.
Exciting. Man, testing's going to make it like something. Testing coming from you guys is going to legitimize Meteor to a lot of people that have been holding off just because on that like little stickler of a thing. So
Well, yeah, I would say it's not a stickler. I would say it's personally it's one of the most important concepts of software engineering. So I'm very excited that we're finally taking it head on.
yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, I'm super excited. This is the end of show number 1. I'm also kind of disappointed. The reason why I'm excited is because Sashko is like freaking awesome. He sat through a whole hour and answered all my idiotic questions. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's a long show. I'm disappointed because we only did one article, The Future of 2016. Now, I have to say, this article did like cover a lot of things, and the topics as it went on, like Arunoda actually released separate articles on each topic that we covered going on. So I think like he kind of like did an index of like his future 2016 releases when he made this article. But we did it. We got through it all. I think after talking with Sashko, we're gonna iterate a little bit on this idea. And show number 2 through 5 is probably gonna be a lot different than the show number 1. And what we want to do is have you guys give us feedback. So if you like this show, let us know why. If you didn't like this show or the format of it and how long it was and everything, let us know why. Because really, ultimately, this show is for you guys. But please be constructive and also fill in all the criticism with lots of positive things because I am a sensitive man.
All right. Yeah, no, I can take it. I've been hardened.
You are battle hardened.
Yeah, great.
So you guys don't know this, but like before the show, Sashko opened up his shirt and showed me his bulletproof vest. So he is battle hardened.
Yeah, prepared.
Kevlar every day, right?
Yeah, that's the only way in this industry, you know.
Right on. Well, as always, thank you guys for listening. And a big thanks to MDG, a big thanks for OK Grow, both you guys sponsoring our time doing this and sponsoring the shows. Check us out on YouTube under the Meteor channel, and check us out on our podcast through all the different distributors under Transmission. Till next time, guys, have a great time developing amazing apps with Meteor.
Yeah, thanks.